Up your mug, your chalice, your glass. Hopefully you already filled it with your favorite liquid. And join me. 1, 2, 3, go. Take it away, Dan.
All right. Today for Empowering Youth, I wanted to talk about this topic of reprioritizing ourselves. So I want to read through this a bit, this project that I posted here that you're showing on the Weekly. I wanted to read through it a bit, and I wanted to open it up, as I always do, with kind of thoughts and reflections from you. But at first, what I want to talk, let's take our breath together for openness and curiosity. So let's take that breath right now. In and out. All right. So reprioritizing ourselves. In many ways, I think parents generally err on the side of not prioritizing their young people. So I think I want to start there. Often children aren't truly listened to, their opinions aren't valued, and they're silenced, ignored, and or often hustled through big emotions, which is terrible. Children are treated like they're too lazy or too bad or too innocent or adults in the making, or like they're empty vessels waiting to be filled. These are important perspectives that need to be reflected on, and honestly, they need to be addressed. At the same time, I think there are many ways that parents forget about themselves. When a family has a baby, it's all hands on deck from the parents for such a long period of time that it's easy to forget what life was like before. Also, these days, parents are expected to be jacks of all trades. Even if partners are sharing the workload, so much is expected of them that there always seems like more to be done. If they ever do finish what they need to do, it can feel like something was missed, which makes it hard to settle. If they're not managing to accomplish it all, how can they feel justified in taking time for themselves? It's easy for parents to get trapped in a cycle of go, 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 and not slow down to reconnect with themselves. What do we as parents want? What are we curious about? How can we obtain that even in little chunks throughout our days? So, what is the value of reprioritizing ourselves? Adults shouldn't fall too far away from their passions and interests to focus on their children's lives or just the general busyness of life. It's easy to say that we don't have time for ourselves, but when we rephrase it as we don't prioritize ourselves, something sounds clearly amiss. For me, connecting with myself and what I want brings many benefits to me and my family. For one, I experience less burnout. Because of that, there is less chance for me to accidentally snap at those that I love, while also giving me softness and gratitude for all that life brings. Basically, burnout is a near opposite of openness and curiosity. Another benefit is that my son gets to see me engaged in my interests. I can talk all I want about equity within the family and freedom, but not at the cost of other family members' freedom. But you can't really live these values and experience all the tangential pathways that are opened up without leaning into them for yourself as well. Finally, there is something to be said about modeling the behaviors we are expected. But on a much deeper and more meaningful level, the more I explore my interests, the more I tend to value my son's interests and passions as well. That means less nagging, less mindless coercing of him to accomplish more of all the aspects of growth or academics I'm worried about. So I want now to take a few minutes. I want us all to take a few minutes and think of a list of the things that we're interested in. What are we doing? What is our self-directed motivation or motivations as adults? And yeah, let's start there. So take a few minutes and really kind of think about this.
Well, I think for myself, that was just always something that, as a homeschooling mom, that's a huge, huge issue, is prioritizing yourself. And it's something that I, as a young mom, didn't really understand as being important. And generally felt guilty for doing things that I was interested in instead of focusing on my kids, for sure.
A story of a time that I was talking to a parent about this idea of priorities, and this gentleman had a very high conviction. Oh boy, that would be Bella. Very high conviction that he was prioritizing what he was doing with parenting correctly. And the key thing he was talking about how important it was that his kids watched the news from multiple different major news stations across the political spectrum. So they weren't just getting CNN, they were getting Fox News and MSNBC. Like they were getting, but I was seeing this as like, okay, clearly you're interested in politics maybe, but what's like the most important thing that your kids should be learning about right now? And are they really getting even are they even really learning about this stuff? Because really these are just for-profit companies that are throwing out sound bites, and the quality of the information there on these news channels, I think it's like crap. So I don't generally show that stuff to my kids, but they're quite versed in policy. They can talk very articulately about, we've written a lot of projects about it, long form discussions around policy issues sometimes as a project. But I think part of the challenge is that when we've met with parents, they'll have really strong convictions about what they think is like the priority. But the real challenge is, how do you avoid kind of getting in a trap where you find out years, maybe decades later, or maybe never, that you're just like totally off, right? So like that's what I fear a lot, is that I'll believe something with high conviction that turned out to be wrong, especially about marriage and parenting. So asking a lot of questions, having deep discussions with you guys, that's a big one. To get challenged from people that I respect, that have different points of view. That's how I try to prioritize myself, and keep from getting in a quagmire of my own mind.
What was that last piece, Joe?
Oh, to avoid getting in a quagmire of my own mind. Did you like that?
No, I meant specifically your interests. I apologize.
Oh, well, my own interest. So, well, I think one of those, like, what's another metric you can use to try to gauge whether or not you're prioritizing correctly? If your children are happy, that's a big one. But also not happy in isolation, where they're never actually being challenged or having what they're doing.
Well, I think what he's talking about is your personal interests. And I think a lot of what Dan's emphasizing is, how do you take time for yourself aside from your children? And
I just don't.
Yeah.
I just live and breathe Weequel every day, all day. Somebody else should probably go.
Yeah.
This is just an intervention for Joe. That's what this call is.
Yeah.
Looks like he needs it too. Joe's gonna be one of those parents who just like cry and cry when their kids graduate and leave. I've met those.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, Elizabeth and Joe brought about a couple thoughts that I have. Elizabeth, what you're talking about makes me think a lot about workload. And the workload is often, for homeschooling parents, it's usually the homeschooling mom. And traditionally, for mothers in our society, they're the ones that are stuffed with all of the housework and the kid work type stuff. Again, traditionally, right? And then the other idea of the mental workload. I don't know if you've heard about this, but kind of like helping like the father coming home to help cook a meal is helping out. That's awesome. But it's not considering all the mental workload of what was the meal going to be? How did the mother source all of the ingredients that they were going to make for it and come up with those ideas, and then plan for that, have them ready, all of that. And maybe that's not the best example, but mental workload is something where if the mother, again, traditionally, is always in charge of the house and the kids, then they have just this huge mass of mental workload that's unfair. But it's easy because it's easy to not worry about as a male often because it's not visible, right? It's not visible, like making money or like the house being clean. Sure, that's visible. But finding the time to balance the house being clean with the kids being happy, with that other 3 appointments that you have to make, even though it's something that you really hate doing. And then, geez, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Like, there's a lot in there. Sorry to go on a bit of a diatribe there, but I think that's a really important thing, especially when we're talking about homeschool families or self-directed education, what have you, that it's often just another thing that's thrown on the wife or the mother's shoulders. And then, Joe, what you were talking about made me think of that quote that we had, I think it was from last week, kind of do the best that you can with the knowledge that you have now, right? And sure, we can always be like, I messed up for the past 10 years, but if you didn't know, you didn't know. And so just moving forward and doing the best that you can with what you know now, right?
Well, I think that's all any of us can do, but the hard part is like acknowledging and kind of accepting that there's so much that we don't know, right? That requires being humble, and it's like kind of scary, but otherwise, I think that's the big difference, I think. And public schools do a great job of convincing people that there's a such thing as knowing everything. You get like an A in a history class and be like, yeah, I know everything about history and connect it to my life, and I got it all. I did it all. I'm perfect now, right? And it's like that mentality of thinking, oh, I'm perfect now. I know everything. It's rather damaging. Our minds are so limited compared to like the infinity of everything. So like cultivating that awareness, I think, cultivates creativity and an open mind.
I think also kind of organizing what are your priorities in your life and trying to simplify the things that you really don't need to do, or stop worrying about the things that you can't really control. Because I think that if you understand, like, this is something that I have direct influence over, then obviously you want to do your best in those areas. But if it's something that you can't control, then why is it, taking up so much mental energy and time? And so I think in that case, it's kind of listing out what are my priorities, what are the things that I'm worrying about, and which of those things can I just do away with? What do I not need in my life that can help take that burden off?
That's the principle that gave me conviction about this parent in the first example. It's like you're training your kid to care about a whole lot of things that at the end of the day is like outside of their circle of influence to have any material impact on. But what about the relationship with their sibling?
Yeah.
Trying to be on a good sleep schedule. What about learning to appreciate food that isn't jacked up with a bunch of MSG and sugar?
I think,
But I think
if I think about all of these talks that I have, and almost generally my message overall, aside, like, in addition to empowering youth, it's, or the path to empowering youth, it always comes down to a little bit of what Sumay was saying about priorities and values, and figuring what those are, and then only moving forward as best you can in alignment with that. And it's super easy to say that, and it's super easy to kind of understand that, but making that happen on on a like a knowledge level, on a behavioral level. These are not easy things that are accomplished, and there is so much of like the deprogramming or deschooling, as I call it, that's in the way. And that's why I think, for example, we should value our own interests. We should be prioritizing the things that we're interested in. And so what I want to do, I want to walk you through some of my specific interests, and I'm just going to give you examples now. And if we get to it later, I'll do a deeper dive. But right now, what I really enjoy doing and what I like learning about, and if we get to it, maybe how I do that. I'm really into rivers. I'm really into how they change course over time. I love them. I really do. I really like nature. I like connecting with nature. Maybe that is a bit on a spiritual level, but even not, just understanding what's happening outside and why. I really enjoy self-directed learning and parenting and the full range of stories of how both can look. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking to everyone here. I like learning about myself socially, emotionally, physically, and that looks different for each of those aspects, and kind of branches out in a lot of different ways. I also really like history. I like cooking. I love humor. I like visual arts, making them, as well as seeing them and talking about them. And I love culture. So that is kind of just a list of things that I try to center in my life, whether it is through my work in a way of like how we've talked before, hard fun, something that you're focused on. It might be a little challenging, but it really is play at its core. Or just in my free time, those are the things that I try to center. But I also make sure that I try to get some of that free time. And I can tell the difference when I'm not getting enough free time versus having enough, because I can tell in my head what my head is feeling. If I'm overloaded in one area, can you all on this call list off 3 or 4 kind of very specific or broad interests like that? Yeah, an About Me project. That's right. But I think that's important, right? That's where we have to start, right? I think that's essential.
Well, I can list a few things. Like Isla and I, we do taekwondo. I like doing piano, reading books. There's a lot of things that we like doing. Part of the reason why I think my dad was kind of struggling with just listing out those things is because I think there's a lot of talk about work-life balance and the kind of compensating that you need to do for suppressing your individuality and your interests to make enough money, or to do the job. And then you do that so you can have that free time to finally express yourself and explore what you want to do. But I think that part of what we have been trying to accomplish with this concept of equilibrium and building projects on your strengths, interests, and passions is that doesn't have to be the case. You can find an intersection where you're creating value and you're also enjoying yourself. And there are going to be times where you have to do things that aren't necessarily super fun. But I think because of that, it's just kind of a different sort of mental model that we use in terms of thinking about what do we do and what is prioritizing ourselves versus not prioritizing ourselves. Why shouldn't we prioritize ourselves in every action, whether it's, what you might call leisure time versus engaging with other people through creating value as well. But
there's also practical reasons why that's more useful now than it was in the past.
Right.
So the number of jobs that are quote unquote like service jobs, meaning the services like consulting, for example, or the arts, or things that involve doing things that aren't just following rote memorization, that involve creativity. that involve things like being motivated, having a lot of energy, being willing to put yourself out there, public speaking, novel problem solving. Those kinds of jobs keep growing at an exponential rate. And the ones that are dropping are the ones that involve acting like a machine. But actually being able to cultivate those skills just requires a different approach to education, and finding that natural motivation to do things. Using interest is a very powerful method for doing that, right? So it's not like we're just trying to be like, oh, you should follow your interests and follow your heart and everything's gonna be fine. Just like, it's like, no, the world is full of challenges, and I've worked in a number of like very high powered professional types of jobs, and that's the nature of success in those jobs. And so, yeah, you definitely want to channel interest, but it's also like interest, but with discipline, right? So like I could sit around, like I could be interested in trains, for example, and just sit around by myself playing with trains all day. But if I'm not adding value to anybody, I'm not practicing, trying to leverage my strengths or my interests, you know, or whatever my passions are towards actually being useful. Like you have to make that jump at some point. So it's like a disciplined approach to that. So yeah, that's probably
Although
why
I don't necessarily know if discipline is always required for every single thing that you do, but even when it comes to things like Taekwondo, and we're not like doing a ton of projects about Taekwondo, I love, in order to get her black belt, wrote a speech for her black belt exam that she published as a project. We do tons of shorts about, like YouTube shorts about Taekwondo, because it just doesn't take that much effort and we're doing it anyways, and we enjoy just doing that on its own. So in some cases, yes, discipline is required, but in some cases, I guess it isn't necessarily something that you have to do.
Yeah,
But I think
yeah, go ahead, Belen.
there's a lot of self-awareness involved, and these decisions that you take are not just one time and then you don't have to make them again. I think the challenge with the go method is like you forget. So it's like a sort of a GPS. You have to see if you're grounded before going forward. So I don't think you're ever done with okay, I made my choice. That's it.
That's a good point, and I like how you use the word GPS, because what we're talking about is like recalibration, and that's a word that I often talk about when I or my son gets caught in something, and I'm like, all right, hey, let's recalibrate right now, let's recoup, and let's try to figure out where we're going next. You know, kind of center yourself, feel what you need next. Are you hungry? What's going on? And really interesting, Sumay, what you're talking about with you're saying sometimes it's not discipline. And I think the common thread is intentionality, right? Like there is kind of this little bit of maybe discipline to Taekwondo, but it would be better phrased almost as intentionality. Like I'm enjoying doing this, and that's why I'm going to continue doing this, or I want to get to this level. Not necessarily like I gotta, you know, bite the bullet and really get this done, or I got to do it in this way, or at this due date, or something like that. But more that you're, you know, kind of aligned and make sure that you're following that, what your intentions are.
I think with some things, there's a certain amount of discipline that comes to building a skill and understanding how can you actually turn these interests into value. And that initial part of learning how that can be done is not something that is super fun necessarily, and is kind of a process of building those skills. But once you have those skills, you just start applying them everywhere. And we're just like, we're doing this anyways. Why aren't we making a video out of it or doing this? Because we've just done it so much. But I think initially when people are first starting, it can seem like it's a discipline, or it can seem like you're forcing yourself when you're kind of later down the road. That's just not the case.
How would we do that with rivers? You know, because I love rivers. I love rivers so much that for one time I'm big into trying to get Sumay out of her shell, because she'll just like sit in the basement back when we had the house before the fire, She would just work all day, and she'd just do this for like months. And then at some point she would kind of like be like, "Hey Dad, how are you?" And just like sit on a chair. Just
Recalibrating.
like burnt out. She'd be so burnt out. And so I've learned to kind of like read her.
Yes.
And be able to sense when she just needs to just have some kind of experience. That's part of the reason why we went to India. So this is one. I bought like 8 blow-up boats from an Aldi. They were on sale for like $20 a pop.
We
So
did not need 8 of them.
I bought a Navy, and then we packed them up in little backpacks. We had 2 each because they're so cheap. You know, they're probably gonna pop. And we just walked out the door and immediately started just using our phones to just try to find a little river. I was just like, I want to find a river so we can pump up these little boats. We can just like become, well, you know, captains.
Found some questionable water.
We found some very questionable water. And I was making little YouTube shorts the whole time. So mommy was trekking us, like she was following along to make sure that we didn't die.
Yeah.
From, although if we just stopped making shorts, does she just assume that we died? I don't know. Anyway, so we were having a great time. I thought it was so cool. I wanted to get to, the goal was to get to the Potomac River. We didn't get there. Because apparently you shouldn't try to, you know, sewers generally don't have a lot of water. Anyway, what was another project? Like going and seeing my grandparents' tree farm and talking about the river. So there's like a river that goes from my grandparents' tree farm. This place is very close and dear to my heart. It's like heaven for me. When I go there, I feel like I am at one with the earth. And I was teaching you and Isla about all of the things that my grandparents and our family did to try to clean up that river, right? And sharing that with you and teaching you, and then also sharing that with the family to try to build community is after my grandparents died. So this is also a way for us to try to reconnect with them. But like we were making projects about rivers to some degree, especially the latter one, but we weren't thinking about it. It was manifesting. We were taking the interest in real time, like breathing, finding ways to have it manifest in terms of value to each other and other people in our lives. So that's why I was confused a little bit. Sumay's right. We just live equilibrium, and that whole concept says, of course you prioritize yourself, but you prioritize what you love in ways that, you know, can make yourself useful, you know?
I thank you for sharing that. And I love the crazy story. I'm like questioning your parenting practices. Oh, well, let's just see if nobody gets hurt today. Let's
I'm
jump
a
into the
horrible
river.
father.
I love it. I really do. And I want to ask everybody if they want to share a couple other pieces of like things that they're interested in. And I also want to say, I want Joe to think about, and this is kind of what you're talking about here, is if you are connecting with your interests through work and you are engaging in hard fun, and that is a lot of your day. I love it. That's awesome. How specifically, Joe, do you find a balance of mediums? And I'll kind of define what I'm saying here. Like, okay, I'm burnt out on reading right now. I'm going to move to a podcast, or I'm going to go outside and talk to someone. How do you find that balance as well? And in the same way that you're pretty much saying that Sumay seems like she needs this other experience, kind of a recalibration, or just to step outside and get some variety. How do you find that for yourself, Joe? And then for anybody else, I want to hear more of your interest and how you engage with them.
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot for myself because I'm at a point in life where a lot of things are changing for me. And, you know, I've had a lot of interests that I've explored in the past, you know, different crafts or activities or things I've done with my kids. And, you know, I always enjoy art and the outdoors and things like that. I don't find myself taking the time to do some of those things. What I was doing previously was reselling, like buying and selling things on eBay. And that's something that like I enjoyed for myself, you know, it's like treasure hunting all the time, you know, yard selling, thrifting, whatever. But it got to feeling very kind of mercenary for me. And I felt like what I wanted to do was to have time to help people, whether that came from something that made me an income or not. And so that's where I feel like, doing something with Weequal, and then perhaps I'll have more free time to do some other things. But something that I've thought about with this whole discussion is that, here in America and in more developed countries, we actually have the freedom to even think about this issue. Because really it comes down to meeting your needs, and for other people in the world, they have to prioritize their very basic needs of, food and shelter for them and their family. And that might look like working all the time, but that is filling their need. Whereas at the same time, I feel like here in America, we have come to a point where there are people who are prioritizing their interests so much that they are not providing themselves and their families with food and shelter. There's a lot of people these days that kind of, obviously they're not, well, there are a few people dying in the streets, but overall people aren't, but they're still kind of having this problem of keeping themselves in poverty and in an unfulfilled situation because they are refusing to just do some work that would make them some money. And so, yeah, I think you obviously have to continue to find that balance, that even work in itself can be fulfilling a need, both a physical need and an emotional need, that it can be fulfilling to provide for yourself and your family.
Thanks. Thanks for kind of grounding this situation in the privilege that we have, and B, the state of people in other countries as well as in our country that don't even have the mental space to be thinking like how we're thinking. So I love that. And it does definitely give you gratitude, and it gives us pause as well. And at the same time, I find that it's a shame for the people that could have the time to center themselves, but aren't, just because of a lack of prioritization, or what have you. And Elizabeth, you use this awesome word, mercenary, and I had to look it up. Primarily concerned with making money at the expense of ethics. I'm going to keep that one. Who's up? Belen, do you want to share some of your interests?
No, I was just thinking about that, reprioritizing ourselves. When we think we're doing what our child needs, in the sense that, at least in the case of my daughter, she was young, but she would say, "Oh, I like the violin." And all of a sudden, my mind will go, oh, she needs to get a teacher, she needs to do training so she can be. And at one point, she started guessing where I was going. It's like, "Mom, I cannot tell you any particular interest I have, because you take me all the way to the end line saying, okay, now I have to be in an orchestra. Now, if I like gymnastics, you have to be in the Olympics." So that's something I think that at least I, as a parent, did, thinking that I could interpret my daughter's interest instead of just listening and letting her take it to wherever it went, for as long as it went. Because, like, for example, sports, she tried everything. She didn't like anything. And I was like, I thought I was failing, but she's being exposed to a lot of things. So that's where I think that reprioritizing ourselves works as well, in the sense that let's not project into them what we think is a priority.
Go ahead. All right. I think I'm ready to try to answer Dan's question, but I'm going to need your help, Sumay.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So the most watched video that we've ever made is this video called First Principle Thinking. And it gets it's kind of cool because it gets another couple, 100 views or something every couple days. So in terms of getting discovered, I think that's probably that's the leading horse on this one. And there's good reason for that. It's called First Principle Thinking. because I think that's it's a strategy for trying to prioritize and understand the world and what to do in it. That's all we have. At the end of the day, every human being has but one thing, and it is what we do in this moment, right? But then life is really hard in a way that's kind of like Minecraft, in the sense that in Minecraft, there's no real end. And the creator of Minecraft made an end to Minecraft, but as a joke. It's called The End, and to get there, you kill Endermen, and then you destroy an Ender Dragon. And it was only because Microsoft was like annoying him and being like, when are you going to create an end to the game? And so he did this just as a joke. He's like, well, life doesn't have a clear goal. It's not like when Sumay was getting her black belt, and still, even though she has her black belt, she goes to the gym and there's a giant sentence on the wall that says, your goal is to get a black belt. It's like, okay, you already got it. You're still going. There's a giant sign there. It's like, you get it. Just like you get your diploma.
Second degree, and then there's the third.
Right?
Yeah.
And I was told, it's like, Joe, you got to graduate. I was like, why do I need to do this? So you can go to another school and try to graduate from that one. So, okay, then I do that. So you can get a job. And it was like, why do you do this? So you can get married. So you can get a house. You can have kids. You can go. And then so you can, grow old, and then you can die and look back doing the things that we think you're supposed to do, because we don't really know. But if we tell you, that means we have to tell ourselves. And if we tell ourselves, we're going to have a midlife crisis. And that was, that's what parenting feels like for a lot of people when it comes to their kids. It didn't seem like a lot of folks had really put much first principle thinking into life. They were just living out the precedent of the expectations that were forced upon them. So one of the things that I was doing really early on, I think, was kind of just sharing a lot of how uncertain I was about what was important. And then there were a few things like understanding happiness, like ultimate currency. That was one of the first projects, right? Ultimate currency.
Mm-hmm.
Helping you to understand that money wasn't the goal. It's useful, but ultimately trying to cultivate positive emotions. Not just like being happy all the time, but just cultivating positive emotions. I was pretty sure that was a good goal, right? And also cultivating.
And also in a long-term sense, because
right.
It's just like satisfying your dopamine.
Right. It wasn't grab this cookie.
Yeah.
It was just, this is one thing. Try generally to cultivate positive emotions in yourself and other people. Other one was like have meaningful relationships. I was pretty sure that was important. But I think one thing I did was I talked to you a lot about the first principles of life, as opposed to these like in your face types of priorities or goals that people might have, like,
Mm-hmm.
well, you need to get A's. It's like,
well, there's that
really
there's that 4 quadrants of like important, unimportant, and then urgent, not urgent, and a lot of people forget the quadrant of important but not urgent. And so I think that was another just like first principle or mental model of thinking about priorities, and having a lot of those in your back pocket and building out a way to think about what are my priorities, what should I do, is just something that kids aren't taught a lot of the time. It's just, here's what you should do. And that can just lead to a feeling of like, well, I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know why I'm here. And
the why.
Yeah.
The why. We always talked about the why.
Yeah.
We had a giant poster of the word why on the wall instead of a TV.
Yep.
Right next to the giant yin yang.
Yep.
And I was constantly asking my kids to ask me why. Because if they understand the why, then they're going to understand the first principles. They're going to dive down, deep down into the stuff that makes adults uncomfortable, like death. Like we only got so many moments here. Right? And so it's like, what are you going to do with this moment? And we did not avoid talking about those things. So like after the fire, yeah, it was horrific. But these girls bounced back really, really fast because it wasn't the first time that they had confronted the thought of death. So I think that's a big one, is why. Talk to kids about, like, encourage them to ask why and challenge you. Because maybe you don't know, I'm talking about me right now. I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question, but.
You took us somewhere.
Okay.
That's good. You added to the conversation. And Belen, I really enjoyed what you were saying. Kind of like, what's the next step, right? Leading someone somewhere. And it reminds me of like the idea that we need to help everybody we hear from, but sometimes people just need to be heard. And sometimes we just need to be present, right? And that's enough. And that's a lot of my thinking these days, is like asking, do you want to be helped or heard in this situation? And if you want to be helped, like in what capacity? Am I following your lead, or do you want me to come up with like a list of ideas or a list of, next steps, right? For that example. And Joe, thinking about what you're saying with the idea of positive emotions, like where, if that is one of our goals, I would almost push back on that and just say emotions, because to just like maximize your positive emotions, I think that's what everybody's trying to do on a rough level. Like, I want more happiness, I want more excitement, I want more fulfillment. 100% I agree with that. But if you're also pushing away the bad emotions, the not so happy emotions, the not like the negative emotions, what you're also doing is you're like limiting the reach that you have to feel good emotions as well as bad emotions. And I think the human experience is about being present in the full experience of our emotions. So if it's sadness, like cry it out, talk to someone, scream, and this is an important way to process. And a lot of people are like, I'm cutting out the sadness and I'm only, valuing the happiness. But what you're actually doing is you're minimizing everything. You're minimizing the happiness or the positive emotions as well. Sumay, what you said about non-urgent priorities, like kind of a light went off in my head. I love that, the quadrant. And I've seen that before. And it really makes me think about, I don't know if you've ever heard of Max Neef. Like there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like physiological. You need to eat, you need to sleep. And then the next step up is you need safety. The next step up is love and belonging, then esteem, then self-actualization. And I think this is great. And what's funny is this actually comes from an indigenous model. That's they basically stole this from Native Americans, the hierarchy of needs. I think the way that Maslow has it set up is a great start. It's a great base to understand like things are priorities, 100%. But this guy, Max Neef, has a model of human scale development. And he talks about not once, and a lot of these that I list here, you're going to think of like, that's a want. But he's saying these are needs. These are fundamental needs of humans: subsistence, protection, affection, understanding, participation, leisure, creation, identity, freedom. And these are all, these are all needs that we have. And it's really deep. It's really deep because he goes into these other things, like things that we think are like satisfy our needs, but aren't. And they're called pseudo satisfiers. For example, scrolling through your phone you might feel like, that's my leisure. And that's helping me with my identity, but really it's not accessing these things. And a lot more of face-to-face type connection, sitting together with people will check off like 5 or 6 of these things. You're getting affection. Someone's understanding what's happening. You're participating in the group together. It's your leisure. And you also are creating this idea, and you're fulfilling your true identity. Whereas if you're like, oh, I need leisure, let's go on a vacation on a cruise, then you're like just checking off the leisure box. So a lot of our society these days goes through that we're using pseudo satisfiers to a large degree. Yeah.
I think some of this is related to the conversation that we were having about paradigms, where sometimes if you have a distorted paradigm, it can make you overemphasize certain things in your life as your priority, and it can be a big hindrance in a lot of aspects of your life. It can suck up a lot of mental energy if you're worrying about certain things that you don't need to. And some things that I've noticed in my own life when it came to reprioritizing myself was not just focusing on output, but what is the rate of my output? What is allowing me to not only accomplish certain things, but also to live my life and enjoy myself and spend time with other people. And part of that is a shift in paradigm of what is important, and also like how am I perceiving the world in a way that might cause unnecessary negative emotion or too much focus on certain aspects. And that can sometimes be a big hindrance, and kind of understanding that it's not like the lens in which you see the world is fixed, and then because of that you need to influence your environment necessarily, but sometimes it's that you're influencing your paradigm, and because of that it will change what you're doing and therefore influence your environment as a consequence.
The happiness model, which is a project on Weequalab, is
Do you mean
actually how
the
we
utility functions
yeah
one?
the utility function one, but I
Right.
called it the happy model.
Uh-huh.
Because I'm also addressing Dan's question. He's like, okay, well, you don't want to just go out and seek happiness. It's like, well,
Right.
yes, you do, but the way that people go about trying to seek happiness usually ends up causing them a lot of suffering, right? If you go out trying to seek happiness by just like, well, brushing your teeth doesn't make you happy because it's kind of a pain to go brush your teeth as like a 3-year-old. Ultimately, you will be quite unhappy over the course of your life in aggregate if you don't take care of your teeth, right? So like using that model, the happiness model, is to try to take everything we know about the nature of human happiness, meaning like just cultivating, you want to have good experiences. You generally want to feel good about your life, right? But how do you go about doing that? You certainly don't do it by suppressing sadness. If you've gone through something that makes you feel sad, or that you can either bottle up and try to suppress it so that it comes out later in your life in horrible ways, or you can try to deal with it, right? Try to confront it and understand and appreciate it and accept struggles. That's a way that ultimately you can cultivate feeling better about your life, right? So when I say seeking that as like a goal, it was more about try to deeply understand the nature of what it means to cultivate positive emotions and live a life that you can have contentment and more positive experiences than negative ones. But that's actually very complex, right? Like, so Sumay was talking about paradigm shifts. And in the model, we talk about paradigm shifts in terms of changing the way that you map your circumstances to how you feel. And you can actually do that. Like yesterday, my kids were relaxing after a stressful day by doing math. And one of the reasons why is it was like one of those, they've cultivated an enjoyment of doing their math because it's one of the things in their life that's actually highly structured, doesn't require them to be super creative. They're just like working through and doing math problems. It's actually quite relaxing in the way that Duolingo has become relaxing for them. But they learn how to cultivate feeling good about doing that by getting good at it and also seeing the value in their life. Just like
Then there's also something like the concept of habituation, where you'll habituate to a certain level of, if let's say you're only used to doing like 10 minutes of math a day, then doing 20 minutes of math is super hard. But one thing we did was a plank challenge, where at first we were like, wow, I did a minute. But once you did a minute, then like we're like, bragging about how he did 1 minute and 30 seconds. And then as you continue compounding off of that, you're like doing 4 minutes and then you're like, oh, I can't believe that I thought that 1 minute was so hard. And
Dan
I think,
can do a backflip.
yeah.
You can't do a backflip.
I can't do a backflip.
Yeah, that habituation. Like people that are, so we would talk about these principles of happiness and suffering and emotions so that she had the tools to push back. Like knowing that if you binge watch a TV show, the first hour that you're watching that TV show is going to be more enjoyable than the fifth. So maybe don't do that, right? First slice of pizza, seventh slice of pizza.
Funny story. We were a couple of years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago. We were just randomly talking about the plank, and my son Kai just did a 4-minute plank. We no prep. He doesn't train for this type of stuff. I wonder if he can do it now, but it was just like, I was like, the timer's still going. I'm like, wow, 3 minutes. And I'm like, my hands were sweating just watching him do this. But he got over 4 minutes and I was like, wow, that's wild. Yeah. And
did a 9 minute.
She got a 9
but I
minute.
don't want to do that again.
She did a 9.
That
the winner? Are you like
no,
the
then
champion?
one
No,
of
then
the
she was
other
beat.
contenders beat me with a 12 minute, but he was a grown adult. So
Corey
Okay.
I'm also gonna say that it
I
was
watched
tough
her the
though.
whole time. That took. I was an engaged parent.
There was, I think the world record is something like over 8 hours.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
I don't even know. I think you just get numb at some point.
Well, if we want to talk about priorities, why is it a priority to do an 8-hour plank?
That
Why
is
it a
true.
priority?
Yeah.
When are you going to
Diminishing
actually
marginal
need that?
utility.
When are you going to need that?
Yeah.
Well, so I think that principle is like just thinking. I think a lot of people that same happy model goes through like 3 different ways you can try to prioritize in your life. If the goal is to try to generally cultivate positive emotions, not by suppressing negative ones, but you just generally feeling good is good. Like if that's the goal, there's like 3 ways you can do it. 1, you can try to get whatever you want. That's 1. And a lot of people seem to feel like that by default, right? The second one is to change what
I
you
can
want
actually
to
share
want.
my project because I did pull it up.
Change what you want
utility
to
functions.
want. Oh, nice.
If you have all these variables of how much happiness you gain from something that's bad for you multiplied by the amount of bad things, like 3 cookies, and then how much happiness you gain from something that's good for you, hanging out with friends, and then like the amount of good thing would be like 1 hour of hanging out with friends, plus your baseline level of happiness. There are a few strategies. The first is to get more stuff, which is just maximizing the amount of bad and good things regardless. And then
minimizing bad, maximize good. That's what you get, right?
no, this would be maximizing both because this is an amount of bad thing that gives you happiness. So it's not something that would give you sadness, but it's even if it's eating cookies or hanging out with friends, these are both good, but you're maximizing
right.
both
Certain
of them.
kinds of things may feel good in the moment, but might have negative long-term consequences.
Exactly.
Right. That's how she defines bad.
Yeah.
Right.
And then second strategy would be change your preferences. For example, like savoring the cookie or trying to be like even more present when you're hanging out with your friends. And then the third strategy would be meditation, where you're trying to increase that baseline level of happiness, which can be done through ways other than meditation, but that's like
So that's the monk strategy. That's what
Yeah.
monks do. They give up everything, they throw everything away, and they go up on some mountaintop and they do a lot of things like meditate, because what they're trying to do is through their actions, because that's really what this does. Your actions end up changing what you value. Wherever you spend time and energy, that's what you end up valuing more. And so by giving up everything that they own on purpose, they're actually causing themselves to care less about the material things of the world. That's also what the Men in Black, they're not called the Men in Black, but in Game of Thrones, you guys that go up on the North Tower.
What are they?
I don't know. Anyway, like they renounce their name and they renounce this and that, and it's like all you have are your brothers defend. And it's like,
Right.
well, of course you're going to care about that after the fact.
Right.
You
The
know?
Night's Watch.
Right?
Yeah.
The Night's Watch.
But
Thank you.
if you think about that kind of strategy, though, it still seems somewhat selfish to me, because then you're entirely prioritizing yourself. Like, say my husband, what if he decided, I'm gonna sell my house and quit my job and go be a monk? Like, that's not a good thing for him to do. He has a whole family to provide for and
Not good
that
for
relies
you.
on him. Yeah, so even that, like,
Well, we're not suggesting that people do
well,
that.
right.
Important choice.
Well, I don't think that living a life just for yourself will result in long-term happiness. So I think
Right.
part of this is what will actually make you happy in the long term, and that will require having some meaning, purpose, connection with other people, and a lot of that can be kind of ignored for the like in the moment dopamine hit of, I don't know, like scrolling on your phone. But if you think about what is actually going to cause long-term happiness, it's going to be something that's very different.
Yes. To be intentional about the difference between short and long-term happiness was a huge part of this happiness model, because if you, as a parent, for example, decide to dedicate a little more time to your kids and like listen to them, guess what? You'll start to appreciate your kids more. You'll start to get more happiness and contentment from spending time with your family. Same thing with marriage. It's like, you're falling out of love. It's just so annoying when I hear this. It's like, well, maybe you should do acts of love and kindness for your spouse, and then all of a sudden you'll start to care more about your spouse, right? That's how the Catholics tricked everybody into, being even more excited about God in the Catholic Church. They said, hey, you got to start giving 10% of all your money to the Catholic Church. Lo and behold, after paying all this money to the church, people are like, I must care about the Catholic Church. I must care an awful lot about, like, that's what happens, right? You end up caring more about where you invest your time and energy. So if you're going to sit there and obsess about, some, fancy influencer on TikTok or on Instagram all the time, and you're just like, oh my God, Katy Perry, like, then guess what? You're going to start to become more and more obsessed with Katy Perry. And what's the long-term, who are you changing yourself to be?
I think that I was gonna say, most people do find that serving others, that doing things for others is like a huge dopamine thing for people. It is something that brings a lot of happiness. And I think, for me, that's the biggest reason why parenting is fulfilling. That's why most people have kids, because you have that kind of built-in group of people that you're doing for, even though sometimes you get tired.
I want to share this concept of adaptive preferences, and I know this is a little kind of out there, esoteric, but adaptive preferences is the idea that you have preferences based on what you're able to do or reach or become. And this actually came out of like feminism, like gender studies, and like the idea of, for example, slavery. You had slaves that were outside of the house that hated slavery, wanted to rebel. And then you had slaves inside the house that supported the system of slavery because where they were was kind of a better place than where everybody else, their skin color was. So their preference was to not run away as a slave. And I know that is an extreme example of this, but it's a good example.
That's a good example. Yeah.
And I think that that parents, I think every one of us has adaptive preferences, and sometimes they're really good. For example, my preference is not to buy, I don't know, a Corvette, and that serves me, right? Because I don't have the money to do that. And so my preference is like what's in my range in terms of a car that I can buy or not, maybe I can't buy a car. And so that my preference is, public transportation or what have you. But I think when we think about parents, that parents take on a lot of adaptive preferences, that their expectations become something else at the expense of, what Max Neef was saying was their needs generally, And
I
I think
think that kind of complicates the whole discussion around what is empowering youth, because if you're just thinking like, what is the preference of my son or daughter, and you're just thinking, what is their preference now? If people have adaptive preferences, then that can kind of mess with like, well, what am I even supposed to go on? How am I supposed to empower them if I can't even know like what their preferences even are at the end of the day, if they're going to change tomorrow, and if they keep playing Minecraft today, are they just going to love Minecraft even more tomorrow? You know, with that whole example.
Are you talking about me? I like Minecraft.
No, but I mean, I think that that's just something that can, if you kind of just have that mental model of like, oh, okay, so I'll listen to them and like, what do they want? And then that could be like, well, how does that even work anymore if you're considering that those preferences can change and what those preferences are even built upon. But
she just hit on our ongoing debate, by the way, Dan. We keep coming back
to Minecraft.
No, the ongoing debate around unschooling, and when are you maximizing freedom and empowerment long term versus maximizing freedom and empowerment in the short term, and
sometimes
how do you find
those
that
can be
balance?
at odds with
Sometimes
each other.
those can be at odds. At least that is my view.
I think for us though, like, I feel like with education, with unschooling, you can really leverage those changing interests of your child to help them learn a variety of things. You know, I mean, that's part of what childhood is about, you know, that they're going to try all kinds of different things, that they're going to be interested in different things, that they don't need to pick something right then. And so that's where, you know, I kind of felt like unschooling was a much better model than saying you're going to study this subject, that subject, this whole year, because you could really maximize their learning based on their kind of specialized interests at that moment, to kind of be able to jump from thing to thing.
Just unschooling versus structured curriculum, because just an example from my own life is kind of pushing me out of my own comfort zone, is that I was never one to ever kind of put myself out there in a leadership position. And in the early days of when everything's called makeshift homeschool, and we had all these kids and adults in the school, my dad would just say, hey, I can't join the meeting, you're gonna run it. And that would never be something that I would choose for myself. The first meeting I ran was 5 minutes long. I bombed plenty of times.
You didn't argue with me.
I didn't argue with you and say that I couldn't do it, but there were points in which you were also teaching me about delegation, where I was like doing a lot of things on my own. I wasn't learning, but you were to say like, hey, you have these people that are really engaged with the school. They love what you're doing. Why aren't you leveraging their interests and their support to help you out with these things? And I was like, no, I want to do it. They're going to screw it up.
You're talking about Seth and the weekly newsletter, and I'm still right about that. But okay, so but here's the thing that changed it all, was that early on she had a really strong mental model of where happiness comes from. Generally, just talking about how the brain chemistry works, positive psychology. You know, we didn't make this stuff up. And so she knew that if she got better at doing things like public speaking, working in a team, thinking on her feet, she knew that if she learned these skills, that long term she would appreciate it more. It wouldn't stress her out as much. Her anxiety level would go down.
Also just need to have experiences of growing through going up that steep learning curve, and then just realizing like, I just put in the time, I put in the effort, and now I'm really good at this thing that I used to suck at. And that's something that I can just do if I decide to. And it just I think
that the issue is that there is the concept that if you're unschooling and you're letting your kid choose what they do, they're never going to choose the hard thing to do. So like if we're talking about priorities, and that's what unschooling comes down to. So in that moment when your dad said, I can't do this meeting, you've got to run that meeting, and you're like, well, I wouldn't have chosen to do it, but you did choose to do it because you did it, because your priority of something that you really wanted to do meant that you needed to lead that meeting. So you did it.
I think
Because
we're
you
getting
had the
into
choice. You could have shut it down, right?
We're
You could
getting
have
into
walked
some
away.
sticky area
Right.
around consent, right? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of unschoolers draw a line on consent in terms of if they're not consenting, like would I push a friend into this? Would I push would I push a friend into this the same way that I'm pushing my child into this? And if the answer is yes, then we're talking about like a certain sort of a nudging coercion. If the answer is no, then maybe this is not respectful of our children, right? And I already know your answer, Joe, and that's awesome, right? But I think like that's just bringing up another facet of our debate, is that line of consent, because there can be harm if a child is not consenting, even though on appearance based they're like, okay, I'll do it, right?
I think that there is complications around consent, because there were definitely points where I was like, I feel uncomfortable running this meeting. I don't know how to do it. I don't want to run this meeting. And I did it because you had conversations with me saying, this is good for you and here's why. And these were very, very long conversations. I think there's a big difference between you got to do this because it's good for you and because I know best, versus you got to do this because, followed by 2-hour long conversation about why this is going to make you a powerful human being and allow you to get what you want in the future. And so I think that there's just a lot of different variables when it comes to everything that we're talking about.
Sumay did this with Kai. So nobody forced Kai to show up and start doing math today. But did Sumay and I
made it very convenient for him to learn math.
I did not know what was going on. Okay, this is not me. This is not Mr. Weekwolf going in there with this. Okay, I did write a project called the P model. I have, but they decided that they wanted to talk to the kids in Learning Pod about math and start to encourage them to see math as a language that once they can speak it will have powerful impacts on them. And I actually at one point gave a little inspirational speech, I think it was last week, to Kai. I just jumped on there and was like, we want you to be powerful, Kai. We want you to be Superman. So you can show the world what you could do. Like it was something like that. It was about math, right? And then they show me like, so today we're going to do trigonometry on, but I just like, how is this making me a superhero? But he was there, right? And so, maybe that's not coercion, right? But at the same time, it's also like really spending a lot of time trying to help kids understand the foundational principles of their reality so that they can eventually just be like, all right, fine, I'll lead the meeting. And then the first meeting was only 5 minutes. Good.
Well, and I think that Dan and I would agree that in our mindset, that's a successful example of unschooling. So this is why I think, like I have said, I don't particularly like the term child-led learning, because some people look at unschooling and they think you're sitting around for your child to find the thing to do or tell you the thing they want to do. And that is not the best way. I mean, if your child does tell you something, obviously you go for that. But as a parent, obviously we have to expose them to a lot of things. And sometimes we have to tell them, I think, this is going to be the best thing for you. That's going to be the best thing for you. Or I think this would be a really good thing for you to do, and explain it. And I have seen my kids choose on some really, really hard things to do. and they've accomplished them. But at the same time, there's been times that we tried to do something that I thought maybe was good for them, and they were just like, no, this isn't going to work for me. So I respect both of those things, with my kids. And so, yeah, I just think that kind of that idea that you're never going to lead your kid to do something hard, or that they're never going to choose. I mean, like Sumay, I feel like you are unschooling, and you are a huge example of how unschooling can work when you actually give the kids reasons why, and give the freedom for them to explore and spend the time, because you wouldn't have been able to do what you're doing if you were in school and being forced to do a different subject every 45 minutes. You wouldn't have had the time, right? So when you give the kid the freedom to do that.
I think that when you look at my position right now, you can definitely say, oh, you're unschooling. But what led up to that, I don't think we would describe that as unschooling. When I was 5 years old, we were not unschooling.
There was some coercion involved.
Yes, there was definitely coercion when I was younger, and I wouldn't be in a place where I had all the information and the willpower and understanding of my potential, and even caring about my potential when I was younger, to be in a point where you could just say, run off and do whatever you want. So I think that's
she earned unschooling.
Yeah, I think that's the big difference, that when we're talking about, like, of course, right now, like, are my parents trying to coerce me into doing things? No, but there's a lot that led up to that.
Me into stuff.
I think what we're talking about with coercion here, it really builds on this adaptive preferences idea that, for example, what Elizabeth was saying with resources, how important it is to expose your child to a bunch of things. What this does is open up the possibility and opens up the boundaries of your adaptive preferences, whereas coercion can have the negative effect of minimizing what is possible and what your adaptive preferences are. I think we're way over time, but I want to close.
Okay.
I want to close with a question. Sorry, Joe. You share it in the room, okay? I want to hear. Okay? All right. I want to share a question.
What do you want? Why can't you give me what I want? I'm just kidding.
When I was young, I really enjoyed coloring pages, climbing trees, watching movies, learning the lyrics of my favorite songs, and dancing. And at some point, I disconnected from a bunch of those. I do dancing now with the Dancing Fridays, which I'm super excited about. I love climbing, and I started climbing trees now when we go to meetups and stuff. So that's really fun. But I want to say, my question is there something you enjoyed when you were younger that now you're kind of too busy or too grown up for? So I want to hear about your responses if you want to share in the room. All right. Thanks for the awesome talk, everybody. We'll see you around.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much.